So I believe that leads now that we would be around to Artie again to start a question. Okay, excellent. So you all identified a number of different things that we could do to combat the COVID crisis. And part of the reason why we've been unable to do that is because we've been underinvesting in those federal programs for so long. And a big part of that is that we spend our money elsewhere, a lot of it on military and defense spending. Roughly half of the federal discretionary budget goes toward the Defense Department and the military more broadly. Is that too much? Is that too little? How do you feel about that? And as a member of Congress, how would you exert your control?
Thanks for the question, Sally. Well, I think first of all, while I strongly support sending Americans back into space, I'm a little skeptical of Space Force and its role in protecting us going forward. And that's not just because of the Steve Carell show, that's because these are dollars that are hard earned, and we have service members in harm's way overseas right now. And let's remember also that a lot of these continuing operations have been funded even through a different mechanism. So even that number that Sally gave is probably under targeting a little bit some of the spending here. Look, for the large part of our history of our country, when we ran a deficit, we were able to outgrow that deficit by keeping the economy going, by getting GDP to grow fast and have double-digit growth or something like that. That's not going to happen. I mean, Sally may disagree a little bit. She's an economist, but that is something that's going to be very challenging to have happen in Alice's lifetime in order for us to grow that fast. So spending changes are going to be a much more important part of this discussion as we decide domestic versus overseas. Let me just say this. For me, my cousins always ask me, I think most of y'all know they work with their hands, and we have a pharmacist and a teacher, but it's still, my other cousin owns a lawn care business. And they said, hey, RD, what did you learn about being in the military? And I always give them the same answer. Victory hinges on its definition. And for me personally, we have got to find an end to these endless wars where we're pumping. At one point, the estimate was 1 trillion, but that was 10 years ago. So I don't even know what the estimate is right now. Linda Bill must put that together. And so we've got to end those conflicts, and people in those own communities have to want democracy more than we do. And for me, that's a big way that we can get a hold of the out of control spending across the board.
Excellent. Thanks very much, RD. I believe that means we're on to John.
Yeah, thank you, Sally. I've told many people I sit on 2 boards for the governor here. One is the Board of Veteran Services. The other is the Veteran Services Foundation Board. On the Foundation Board, one of the things that we do is we supplement the revenues from the General Assembly by giving from the private community, and we deal with behavioral health issues of our veterans, homelessness, and suicide prevention. Clearly, and I have a couple of young veterans here with me that I'm so very proud of that have served overseas. Many of their contemporaries that have come back from these foreign wars are facing PTSD, traumatic brain injury, and additional challenges. I'm of the opinion that we do not need to be getting involved in endless foreign wars. And frankly, in my time in the Pentagon and the Marine Corps, there was a lot of discussion around where's the diplomacy. You can't just hit every nail with a hammer. And you've seen what this president has done to the State Department and our intelligence community, specifically our State Department, so that diplomacy and diplomatic solutions are really no longer, at the level that they could be or they should be. We also get involved in wars over fossil fuels, and this goes back to my answer on the climate change issue. We have got to wean ourselves off of fossil fuels, and in that way, we won't have to get involved in as many wars in areas of the world where we're dependent upon other countries and other energy sources. And if we look at this from a global perspective of diplomacy versus military response, if we look at it as a way of recasting our economy toward clean energy, I firmly believe that we'll save a lot of that money, that 50% of GDP that we're spending right now on military and defense spending. We can do it, but it'll take hard work and it'll take political will.
Thanks very much, John. Claire, you'd be next.
So obviously a pretty personal question for me, being a Marine and having an active duty husband. But what I can tell you is about 0.003% of America has a first degree connection to an active duty service member. What we're talking about in terms of that discretionary spending is on the defense industry. It is absolutely going to the wrong place. The most important part of our Defense Department are the people who put their hand up and say they will support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America. And we are not investing enough in them, and we are investing far too much in things like J-35 strike fighters, which are meant to maybe be part of the Space Force, because there is no nation that has an air threat that we need a J-35 strike fighter to address. Ultimately, I've watched over the last 20 years our defense budget grow and grow and balloon in a very reactive response to the conflicts we have participated in, that we have gotten ourselves into. There is a lot of fat that needs to be trimmed. We do not need to be building walls on our border with our defense budget, particularly not with our discretionary funds. And I think that this is a question that is at the heart of why I want to do this. If we listen to our military leaders, they will tell you that the spending is out of control, and it's on the industry. We are spending it on the wrong people, the wrong thing. So there's a lot of fat to be trimmed. This is absolutely critical, and it's why I'd like to be on the Defense Appropriations Committee.
Thanks very much, Claire. Cameron, you'd be last.
One of the great things about this race and these three colleagues is that I learned so much from them. And I think a really critical part of this job is knowing where you have expertise and knowing where you can listen to and learn from the expertise of the people around you. And as you've heard from the three of them, is pretty clear there's a challenge with our defense budget. Right now it's north of $700 billion. And like you said, it's about half of our discretionary budget. And the fact of the matter is it is impeding our ability to invest in other critical areas like healthcare, like housing, like education, like transportation, like infrastructure that John talks about so much. So there are so many things that we'd love to be doing that we're not doing because we're spending it on defense. And so I love a lot of what Claire just said, specifically talking about how we're spending it on the defense industry. One thing, and RD actually mentioned this at the onset, I know I'm giving a nod to everybody, but it's great to have this much expertise around me on the screen. But one thing that he mentioned early on is this idea of endless wars. And right now our US military is involved or engaged in over 140 countries at the last count that I saw. And so I think that military presence is part of the challenge. We have to approach our engagement with non-military diplomacy in nations all over the world. And I think that that's a big part of why we're spending to the extent that we are. But I think that, but there are so many opportunities to, as Claire said, cut the fat on that. And I look forward to continuing to work with military leaders and veterans and folks who have real insight into this, because we've got to listen to that perspective and bring that with us in Congress as we advocate for using that discretionary budget in a different way.